All right. Hello everybody. We're gonna be going on to question three now. What would Python do? Um, so for these types of problems, you'll probably be given like a block of code, and then um, each call will result in something that you're gonna be looking for. It's important to note also in these problems that you're assuming that each consecutive call is in order. So, for example, if you call A, like what's this code in A, then you're assuming that this was called before our next one, and so forth. Um, but yeah, you can go right into it. Um, so for part A, we set A equal to func of the list 5, 6, and parentheses, and then call A. So we can look back into our code and find our func function, this right here, which is a function within a function, lambda function x, with its return as lambda, which returns x. Um, yeah, so our initial input is this list 5, 6, which goes into, I guess, this x here. Um, and then we also have this parentheses here that's basically saying that the inside nested function also has no input. As you can see, this lambda function doesn't have any arguments. So what happens is that because there's no parameter x, our x that's referred to inside of our lambda function defaults to the outside global x, which basically returns itself. Um, so the answer to this question would just be the list 5, 6. Um, and yeah. So moving on, B equals adder of A. So we know what A is already, and we can go back and look at our adder. So our adder is also a lambda function. However, this one uses a list comprehension. Um, so each input, or I guess each element of A is going to be iterated over, and we'll see what happens. So the zeroth element, or the first I, was 5 in this case. Oops. So we can have our list A. So when we're looking at our first I, or our first element, um, we want to create a new list or return a new list based on this list comprehension. I plus 1 for I and X. So I plus 1, 5 plus 1 is 6 for the first I, which is, I guess, the zeroth element in X, which is this whole thing right here. So we know our first element is going to be 6. Now we have one more that we're going to um, iterate over. So for the first element, our I is now 6. So 6 plus 1 is 7. And we have no more elements after that. And that is why the answer to this question is 7 or 6, 7. Moving on to question 3. This one's a little deceptive. So we are given A, which is just a list 1, and we print A dot extend brackets B. However, although this seems like we're going to be extending the list, we're actually the return of our function is going to be none because print statements return none. As we see here in this code, we're not actually returning anything. We're just printing um, what is resulting of our list changes. So this one would just be none. However, in the next problem, D, we do actually look at what our A is now after its extend. Um, so let's go through it again. So A is 1, okay? And now I want to extend it by B. So we already know B is 6 of 7, but this answer is not going to be this. This is incorrect. That is because the syntax of extend automatically accounts for the brackets outside of 6 and 7 that make it a list. So including these extra brackets here basically means that we're inputting this into our extend, which means that our resulting list will actually include 6, 7 as its own individual element. And that's why the answer to this is 1 and 6, 7. A list of just two elements. Okay. Moving on. Now we're going to be playing around with our stir function. So our C is defined as stir, which takes in two n ingredients. So let's go back up, and then we can check out stir here. So our count is 2, and our elements is ingredients. Ingredients is a dictionary, and what stir does when called is returns a list res, which we'll see what happens to inside of this block of code here. Um, so yeah, so when we first call this, we create a new list res, okay, and we have a nested for loop, as we can see right here. So the first one deals with a count. So for I in range of 2, since our count is 2, and inside we have 4 JK in elements.items. That basically means J and K are associated with the key and value, respectively, of our dictionary. And in our dictionary, we seemingly only have two pairs of those. So this will only um, cycle through twice. Um, but yeah, so for our first kind of cycle, we see if k mod 2 is equal to 0. So what is k at first? K is 5 and j is flower. But we know k is 5, and so k mod 2 is actually not equal to 0, which is why we don't do this and we go into else. So else res.extend and this whole thing here. So kind of going back to our answer in question A, we know that this will result in a um, whatever we input into our func here. That is because even though we have a function within a function, this additional parentheses kind of tells us that we're kind of executing this inside function even though it has no arguments. So if we input 5, our resulting extend will be 5. So that is why the first element in our res will be 5. Now we go back. So for j of k in elements.item, so our j is now, oops, eggs, and k is now 2. And we go back. So if 2 mod 2 is equal to 0, so 2 mod 2 is equal to 0. Um, so that means we res.append func of k. However, this time our func of k doesn't have our additional parentheses right here. This basically means that we reduce this function to still have a function within that hasn't been executed yet because it hasn't had any arguments put through it. Even in this case, we have no arguments, but because we don't indicate these brackets, this in itself is a function that, yeah. So this would be function. And then since the count is 2, we go through this one more time. So we get 5 function, 5 function. And then we can write that down in our answer box. 5 function, 5 function. Okay, moving on. Now we have adder equals lambda x list comprehension I plus 1 for I in x. And then we use a map, which is a built-in Python function, on lambda x, adder, and range. So a map takes in a function, and then it takes in an iterable. So our function, oops, our function in map is going to be applied to each iteration in iterable. our iterable in this case is just 0, 1, and 2. So we see that adder lambda x is a function in itself. However, our function called within map is actually another function. So adder, what happens is that because adder is a function, our input argument would be a function within a function, which means if we map it onto 0, 1, and 2, we're actually going to return three functions because we can only input 0 or 1 or 2 into here, but we actually don't know what this parameter is going to be. So that is why that one is function, function, function. Moving on to G, now we use reduce, another built-in Python function. Um, this one similarly takes in a function and an iterable. However, this reduce can be kind of looked at as a cumulative operator. Um, Basically, we're going to be testing these two, and then the result thing of that versus the next value. So let's see first. So our x is going to be true, which is the first element, or the zeroth element, and then y is going to be false. Um, and then we can write out the statement, which is the return of our function, true and false. So knowing the functionality of and in Python, we know that this will net false because an and statement says that both of these must be true in order to return true. So given that that is false, now we test this new false, oops, with true. So our false becomes our x and this true becomes our y. So again, false and true. This statement, again, knowing the functionality of and, will result in false because we have one false in the statement and not and both of them are not true. And that is why this line of code will result in false. All right, now going on to the last question. This one uses filter. So just like reduce and map, filter also has a function and an iterable. Um, in this case, however, this filter is going to result the remaining parts, or I guess elements of this list that satisfy our true or false returning function here. Just a reminder that this function must return true or false, cannot return anything else or any other data type. So let's think through this. So I guess our first element that we're going to be testing in our list that may or may not be filtered um, is the string UC Berkeley. So if we make S UC Berkeley, that means we take or we splice 0 to 2 elements of UC Berkeley and check if it is equal to the string UC. So this is the 0th element, which is this one, and then the second element, which is this one. So we're looking between this. So is this equal to UC? It is. It is UC. So this value returns true, which tells our filter function to keep UC Berkeley. However, for the next value in our next element in our list, Stanford does not satisfy that because the first two elements in our Stanford string is not U and C. So this one will get filtered out, therefore leaving our list with just UC Berkeley. Now, that is what our good schools is. However, when we call next, it's going to pick the next element in our list. So since we're not I guess at any element, the next element will be the 0th element, which is UC Berkeley. And that is why the answer to this question is UC Berkeley.